talk about life. Maybe not with information. Let's talk about life. And let's talk about love.
Good morning. This is Valvalie Harity, broadcasting from beautiful St. Petersburg, Florida. I'm very, very, very excited about this show. It's a very personal show. I've started a series, as many of you know, called For the Love of Dogs, and I'm very excited about the series. There's been a tremendous response to it. But I feel like, I know on a deeper level for me, it's about losing my little love, Miss Nena. And I think the show would be it would be necessary for me to tell her story before I moved on to the series. There's many, many things we're going to be doing. The series may last quite a while. It's a lot of people coming forward and saying, we want to be part of this. We have stories. We have interesting tales about dogs. I'm kind of thinking about dogs and dads because I know from everything I've heard and read that sometimes, you adopt a dog into a family, maybe for a child, and it turns out that the dog becomes the dad's dog. So I'm very interested in hearing about dad dogs for the next broadcast on near Father's Day. So first, before I start, I want to tell you that this is called Let's Talk Life. It's broadcasted out of beautiful St. Petersburg, Florida. It's a wonderful day today. I can't wait to, frankly, to go out. This is a live broadcast, so as soon as it's over, I'm going to be going out. And I just am excited about everything. Very upbeat, very excited to share. I'm grateful for my sponsor, which is United Parcel Service on 2nd and 2nd South. Been a wonderful sponsor all year. I'm very happy to have him. He's helped me get the show launched and started and the expenses involved in all of that. So I want to say thanks to Joe and UPS. And for those of you who don't know, UPS on 2nd and 2nd is a full-service UPS store. Mailboxes, obviously packaging. You can get your passport photo taken there. There's cards. They have wonderful cards you can buy. A great selection of cards, actually. And they're very, very customer friendly. They also are open on Sundays because there's such a need in St. Pete for people who come and go, especially snowbirds, to send stuff back and forth. So I want to mention that in case you have to ship something or want to ship something on a Sunday. So thank you, Joe. I've got a lot of people to thank, but I'm going to mention people throughout the show, so you'll be hearing a lot of things. I've organized the show around how I wound up rescuing Miss Nena, what she was like personally, and the journey between our development as I guess best buds is the best way to put it, because she's a Shih Tzu. And Shih Tzus were bred for a lot of reasons. The primary one was to guard the imperial palace in China. And they were chosen because they had such excellent hearing. And if they heard something, suspicious, they would bark. And when they barked, the bull mastiffs woke up. And when the bull mastiffs woke up and barked, then the guards woke up. So they were the first line of defense on the imperial palace. The other thing about Shih Tzus back then was, unless you were a member of the royal family, you could not own a Shih Tzu. If you did, you were put to death. And the Shih Tzus miraculously survived the dynasty because most of them were killed when the family fled during when they had to flee the country. So Shih Tzus and the Empress created smaller and smaller and smaller ones because she liked to put them in the sleeves of her big, heavy coat. They, it was very cold there, and so everybody had a lot of clothes on. And she had these long sleeves. Sometimes some of them had tassels on them, I think. Yes, I believe that's true. And she would put a dog in each sleeve. So Shih Tzus were all over the Imperial Palace, and they were the first line of defense. The other purpose in their life is to be a companion. They don't do anything else. They're not hunting dogs. They're not show dogs. Their whole purpose in life is to be your companion. And personally, that was hard for me when I first adopted her because, it cramped my style in a number of ways, which I'm going to be talking about. So Miss Nena came along in my life. She changed my life, definitely. I had her for over 10 years, and we were inseparable. It just became the way it was because of her commitment. She was also, I called her my little bodyguard, because whenever I sat down anywhere or went anywhere, she would position herself in some way, usually behind my chair or under my chair or somewhere where, and her back would be to me. So she was like doing guard duty. I always felt like she was doing guard duty. So that was something that I had to pay attention to early on in our relationship, which wasn't real smooth in the beginning. First of all, I'll tell you how we met. I was at a friend's house, and it was a book club, but one of those book clubs where nobody reads the book. So we were all talking, and this Miss Nena was there, and she had been rescued from Puerto Rico. And she was very tiny, and she wasn't in real great shape. But the moment I walked into that house, she attached herself to me. And we started to joke about it. I got up to go to the ladies' room, and she followed me. And I remember saying, "Hey, can I have some privacy?" And everybody laughed. But she attached herself to me. And the next thing I know, I'm holding her in my arms and talking to her. And, suddenly I'm starting to have feelings. But the book club was over. I went home. And there was a campaign for me to adopt her, but I wasn't aware of it. It was kind of a covert operation. So one day, the person that rescued her said, "Belva, I'm going out of town. My sitter doesn't want to take care of 3 dogs. Can I leave Nena with you while I'm gone?" So I said, "Well, how long are you going to be gone?" She was a reasonable length of time. And I said, "Well, sure, why not?" So Nena appears at my door with her accoutrements. And suddenly there's a lot of stuff, in my place that belonged to Miss Nena. And I didn't know what to do with her. I owned a dog I was crazy about for years as a child named Sparkplug. And Sparkplug appeared in the dead of winter. My father opened the garage door to get his car out to go to work. And out jumps this puppy. Nobody has any idea of where he came from, how he got in the garage. Well, obviously somebody snuck him in the middle of the night. But here's this puppy, and it's really, really, really cold out. So he has to go to work. So my mother, of course, brings the puppy in because it's so cold out. We're trying to make sense of this. I was, I think about 7 or 8 at the time. And the next thing you know, the puppy stays. So I had Sparkplug for a long time. And it's interesting because he kind of died the same way Nena did. He had a heart attack, basically. His heart failed. But he was a wonderful dog, and he was a roaming dog. Back then, there wasn't a lot of talk about neutering. Everybody let their dog out. There was a different atmosphere in the community I was raised in about dogs. You just open the door and out they went, and then they come back when they were hungry, or they would sit in the sun whatever. We had a big yard, but it wasn't fenced. And suddenly, couple years into his living with us, after he grew up, I mean, there's starting to be puppies all over the neighborhood that look just like him. And people started to joke about it. So he became sort of the sire of the neighborhood puppies. This was in Chicago at a community called West Rogers Park, way back. And I'm not going to date myself too much, but way, way back, okay? So that was my memory of Sparkplug. And his nickname, of course, was Sparky. So I'm thinking of Nena. I'm thinking, here's this dog. What do I do with her? So my first thought is, oh, my God, I better walk her. So I walked her like way too much. But walking her was like a wake-up call for me about dogs, because she apparently was not the person who adopted her, just opened the door and had a fenced-in yard, and her 3 dogs went out and did their business. Nena on a leash was a handful for a tiny little dog. And back then, when they rescued her, she was maybe 4 pounds, something like that. She had a terrible skin condition. She had a lot of medical problems that needed tending to. So anyway, I go to walk her, and she's not good on the leash at all. So I thought, what do I do now? So it was a learning curve for both her and I. She apparently lived in Puerto Rico by begging off of cafe tables, because we could not pass a restaurant that had outside dining where she wasn't blatantly begging. And I was embarrassed. I mean, I was feeding her. So it got to be these learning curve on what to do. One time she leaped into a bush. And I said, oh, my God. And I'm trying to get her out of the bush, and she's all tangled up in this bush, and she's actually starting to growl. And I said, what? Because it's night, and I can't really see everything that well at night. And she finally emerges from the bushes with a piece of pizza. So what the hell? So I tried to take it away from her. And she was the only time that she was ever aggressive with me. She was not going to relinquish this pizza. Thank God she didn't get sick from it. It didn't look that bad. But I realized that she had been, it helped me understand how she had PTSD. From her experience on the street in a place like Puerto Rico, where there are no doggy services, there's no rescue groups, there's no shelters, every animal is on its own. And for a tiny little dog to be on the street in a country like that, she was starving. And so we had to come to a lot of understandings together. And over time, of course, everything worked out. So meanwhile, I grow more and more attached to her while my friend is off on their vacation. And the next thing you know, I decide I want to keep this doggie. There were so many wonderful qualities about her. But there was also a lot of medical bills. So when my friend got back, she actually had this agenda without my knowing it, and she agreed to pay the medical bills if I adopted Nena. And so I did. That was the agreement. And first of all, Nena had a hernia. She had a terrible skin condition. She was itching so badly all night long that sometimes it would bleed. And everything I tried that everybody says to do didn't work. Oatmeal baths, certain diets. I can't tell you the fortune I spent on different foods trying to help her itch. So I did use some skin products that were somewhat effective, but she was really had serious skin allergies, and she had a double set of teeth. So she needed, dental work. She needed a hernia repair. She needed allergy treatments, and she also hadn't been neutered. So I admit having mixed feelings now about having her neutered, but that was what everybody did. And I'll be honest, it would be wonderful to have a little Miss Nena puppy, but that was not meant to be. So here I am with this dog. So the first thing I do is we're going to get down to, all the medical treatment was taken care of except for the skin. And I found out there was a doggy allergist in Clearwater who specialized in dog allergies. And so I brought Nena there. First of all, finding a good vet that doesn't bleed you to death is a challenge. So that's something I want to talk about too. Gulfport vets seem to be the most honorable. I know everybody out there loves their vets, so please don't take this personally. But I had trouble with vets, overcharging over this and over that, and all kinds of things. I won't tell those stories. It doesn't matter. Anyway, the point was, I brought her to a doggy allergist, and she was immediately diagnosed and given something called Apoquel. And I tell you, I thought Nena died and went to heaven, because within 10 minutes of her first Apoquel dose, it was a little tiny pill, she stopped itching. She calmed. She was like watching the sun come out after a storm. She just transformed right in front of us. And I thought, oh, thank God, thank God. So Apoquel became vital to Nena's well-being most of her life. And that's how severe her allergies were. So here we are now. I've got this little doggie. Her medical treatment is over. She's got her allergy meds, and thank God they weren't that expensive. And off we are, starting our relationship. And I guess the first thing that I want to share is after I rescued her and things settled down, I got a book on Shih Tzus. And that's when I learned about the Imperial Palace and their personality and traits and things like that. And the one night, I can't remember exactly when, but things had settled down, I had this dream. And in the dream, if you remember, all of you remember the movie about the Christmas, it's a Christmas Story, where all the dogs run through the house and steal the turkey. And Darren McGavin is having a fit. And in the end of the movie, they all go out to eat Chinese food. But it's about the little boy whose rifle wants a BB gun for Christmas and his quest to get this BB gun. It's a charming movie. It's a classic. So here's my dream. In my dream, I'm in the kitchen of the movie house, the kitchen that was in the movie. And there's a man there. I'm talking to him. And I don't know who it was. It's just a general man. So it's a male energy. It's symbolic anyway. It doesn't matter who it was. And I'm looking around. And I said, where's Nena? Where's my new dog? Where's my dog? And I'm looking all over. I'm looking all over this kitchen. And the man points out the window. So he was what we call a dream guide. And he points out the window. And there's Miss Nena. She's sitting on top of the head of a huge Chinese dragon, the kind of dragons we've all seen in parades, with smoke snorting out of their nostrils and a very big head. And she's sitting on top of this Chinese dragon. And I turned to the man and I said, gee, I better take really good care of her. And that became sort of imprinted on me, because Nena, personality, once we all settled down and she came out as who she really was. And dogs are foolers in the beginning. They're very sweet and wonderful if they want to be but then after a while, their nature, like everybody else's, nature comes out over time. Miss Nena was entitled is the best word I can think of. She had this bearing about her. She had this way about her. She reminded me of somebody with a lot of wisdom. She had this way of communicating, she barely ever barked. But she did have this attitude. And it was one of entitlement. Like, I'm somebody. And you better, know that about me. So it showed up in so many little ways. The first thing is, she was very indifferent to being fussed over. I would call her my little icebreaker. And we'd go out. I'd have a tendency to sort of meditate or do a lot of thinking when I'm out taking my walks. And people would stop and fuss over her, and she would tolerate it. She never sought it out, but she was tolerant. And tolerant of, kids could, like, one kid tried to, pinch her, and she just stared at the kid and stepped back. No barking, no nipping, no nothing. But she was like, okay, go ahead, pet me. I'll put up with it, I understand. So this was kind of, but she became an icebreaker. And many, many, many conversations were around, meeting Miss Nena. And I had quite a few friends to this day that I met while I was out walking Miss Nena. It was just the way it was. People would sit down. A lot of people would tell me about their dog, and a lot of them talked about the dog that passed. And she just opened a lot of conversations. I remember one time I was walking down First Street, across from the Rowdy Stadium, and this car pulls up, and this woman jumps out. And I said, "Are you okay?" I thought, the urgency with which she acted startled me. I said, "Are you okay? Do you need help?" She says, "Oh, no. I just want to pet your dog." And I thought, oh, brother, this is what I thought to myself. I said, "Well, certainly. I'm glad you're not hurt." Because meanwhile, her car's in the street blocking a lane, and she's fussing over Nena. So she evoked that kind of response. And she was very tolerant. Children could pet her. They could, fuss over her, and she would just kind of sit there. And she never responded that much. But she was inviting that by her charming little looks. At this point, she's about 7-8 pounds. She's very, very tiny. Very tiny. I think her nose was like 3 inches, 4 inches off the ground. So she was very heat intolerant. So summers were hard for her. So my little icebreaker opened a lot of doors for me, and also opened my heart because, I go about my business. If you're not, in relationships, or you're not in love, your heart rests. So my heart could use a good rest. So I had my moments, and I was fine just living my life. But she opened up a level of feelings for me that was wonderful. And plus, she was my companion. She made it her business to be my companion. I didn't have to do any work, So we had to adjust things around the house because she couldn't jump on furniture, which was good. But, eventually it took about a year before I let her sleep in my bed. But she had a wonderful little bed at the foot of my bed. And, I think one night something happened. She had a lot of dreams. She had a lot of nightmares. I think she went through a lot. Because her nightmares, she was clearly had nightmares. They weren't just dreams. So I remember one night just bringing her up into bed, and that was that. So things unfold with your animals. So I wanted to tell you, I'm going to take a brief break, and then I'm going to tell you some stories. And they're going to be brief little anecdotal stories. And I'll be right back. Well, I can't find a pause on this. Where's my pause? Anyway, I guess we won't pause. Well, that's okay. Gee, let me tell some stories. First of all, we spent our days in the park in St. Pete. And this is what we would do. If the park was very far away, I would drive. I would have to drive her to Vinoy Park because she couldn't walk that far and then get back. And but we often just went across the street to Whitted Park. And she loved Pioneer Park and all the parks. So we just rotated sort of in a way. And one day we're at the park, and it's a gorgeous day, and I'm sitting at a bench kind of facing the old pier. And it's one of the few shady benches there. So we're sitting there, and I'm just sort of enjoying the day. It's a beautiful, beautiful day. And then out of the corner of my eye, I see this dark thing coming over the sky, and it was moving very quickly. And I stared at it, and it just suddenly was completely, approaching. It was huge. It was a black shelf. And I was stared at it, and it happened so fast. And I remember thinking, boy, I'm glad I'm not on the pier, because, there's no escaping this, how fast it was moving. So meanwhile, Nena was under my bench. And she comes out from under the bench. I'm going to have a little sound effects for this story. Although I have to admit, there was no sound effects at this part of the story. But I'll tell you what happened. She comes out from under the bench and just stares at me. And then she actually kind of nips my ankle. And I come out of my reverie because I was so fascinated by this force of nature. And I remember looking down and saying to her, "You're right, let's get out of here." And we ran to the car. And while we were running to the car, it started to hail. It started to rain. I've actually got photos of a tiny little tornado up there that was forming. And it was terrifying. And by the time we got home, the whole city was just under this black, horrible storm. It moved, it went left very quickly, as quickly as it came. But, if Nena hadn't nipped my ankle, could have been caught in a much worse storm. So there's how she communicated with me. So that's a story. Another thing that we did was a lot of night walks. And I started posting night walks because Nena's speed at night was about a mile an hour. And we didn't walk. It was a night sniff. We would go out. It was cool, especially in the summer because she was heat intolerant. And she would sniff her way down the street. And it was very slow. And I'm not the most patient person. So I started taking photos. And with my cell phone, I said, okay, what can I do while she's sniffing all these blades of grass? So I wound up taking photos, and I just started posting night walks with Miss Nena. And they became very, very popular. I told stories of what happened on our night walks, the things we saw, the things I photographed. I told stories about Bicycle Joe, and I would often see him. He was a black guy that rode around at night on his bicycle, an older guy. And every time he saw me, he would say, "There you are again. There you are with that little dog. There you are." And he would ride on. The police did a lot of horse training in the parking lot at Publix. So we would go and run into that. There was a lot of things going on at night that I found interesting that I was able to photograph. I loved the backlit flowers. Got some great shots of backlit flowers. Sometimes we'd get in the car and I'd go down to Straub Park, North Straub Park, We'd walk the park because later at night that spot were only people are only around there. Everything else was very, very quiet. That may have changed recently, but back then when we would go to Straub Park, it was the only, and it was fine to see people there. And we would I'd walk her through the park, sometimes sit at a bench and look at the beautiful stars and things like that. Just a very relaxing experience. A lot of people came and went from the Vinoy Hotel, coming back from, dining out and things like that. And then sometimes we'd go over to Trist. And I love Trist because, first of all, they're the only place open. But secondly, they were very doggy friendly. I met a lot of people at Trist. I'd sit there and I'd have a drink, and Miss Nena would sit down. Sometimes I'd have a little snack and visit with other people. And, it was very little social hour. And then we'd go home. So there was a lot of parks. Vinoy, of course, was incredibly popular. We would sit there at the far benches by the water and see the dolphins. And, I remember once sitting there with Nena, and I saw about 7 or 8 different forms of wildlife in maybe 10 minutes. And if you sit still, you'll be amazed at what you notice. So it was a wonderful experience sitting there. We went there fairly often. It was because there was different benches, different ways to walk. I loved the sculptor there. Took a lot of photos from there. So that was some of our walks. And I also I'm changing, this is the second story now. Bo Estrom called me one day and she said, Velva, I'm making a movie. I'd love for you and Miss Nena to be in it. And I said, well, what's the movie about? And she told me. And it's been produced, so I'm going back, I think, to 2013 or 14. And I made a little placard for Miss Nena, and she became my walking ad. And I was very active in photography at the time. I had been selling photos. I had done photo shows. I had curated shows, art shows. So I knew a lot of the local artists, and almost everyone I knew was in the film. And it was a delightful film, but it was hot. It was a hot day. And I remember saying to Bo, listen, you've got maybe 5 or 10 minutes and she'll be done. I said, trust me, just trust me. So we're walking up the street, and she's on a leash. She's got a little placard on, and we're being filmed. And sure enough, about 7 or 8 minutes later, she sat down, and that was it. But it was a great shot. She was able to capture what she needed. And I think Robin Schwedo was the filmographer of that. And Kevin and I are in the film together. We're stopping and talking on the street. So it was a lot of fun, and the film turned out to be totally charming. It's called Buy My Art Before I Die, and it's on YouTube if you want to check it out. I also posted it on my wall this morning. So that was delightful too. And she was very photogenic. So the other story I wanted to tell was about a road trip we took. Now, one of my reluctances to rescue Nena, or to have a dog in my life, any dog, was because I love to travel. And I love the idea of spontaneous travel. And one of the things I had to seriously consider was, okay, what do I do with this little doggie? What are the ramifications of travel with an animal? And I learned a lot about that. I took a number of road trips with her. First of all, she loved road trips. Now remember, we've got a little tiny dog that doesn't bark, or rarely barks. And I got a little carrier for her because I wanted to go back to Chicago to see my family. And I wanted to bring her with me. I wanted her to meet them. So that turned out to be a very expensive proposition. I think the one trip I took to Chicago, her airfare was higher than mine. And I traveled Southwest. I think I got a real bargain trip for $94 each way or something like that. And I had to pay $125 for Nena. And she had to fit under the seat in front of me, and the carrier cannot be higher than 9 inches. So I had to run around and find the right container for her. However, the good news was half the time nobody ever knew she was there. My seating companions, the people around us, she would go to sleep. And I remember, as long as my foot was by her little carrier and she could, know that I was there, she was very content just to go to sleep. So travel on a plane wasn't a problem. It was a problem when I went to Sedona, because that was a longer flight. And then I had to find out, we have to find out, all of us who travel with animals have to find out where the airport potty is for doggies. And so you have to accommodate your animal considerably when you're traveling, because it becomes about them instead of you, because there's all considerations, especially a road trip. My favorite road trip was the one to Key West. I was going to visit Janet and Jack Hartwell. Those were people, I went around the world once on a 4-month cruise, and this was my big indulgence. And I met them on that cruise, and we just became friends. And they had a wonderful home in Key West. They welcomed me and Nena. They had a doggie. And their home, I think, is on an historic places, because they spent years bringing it up to its original status, so making it not refurbished. There's another word, I can't remember right now, but you don't rebuild the home, you restore it to its original, and you use all original things. I remember being very, very impressed with this house. So we get in the car, but no, we don't get in the car. I spend a good solid week figuring out how to get from St. Pete to Key West doggy style. Where are the dog parks? Where are the drive-in restaurants? Where are the, all the considerations that you have to make when you're traveling with an animal? She was great in the car, but after, an hour or so, she got very restless. So, I would stop. I would want to stop a lot. So the trip took a lot longer. And driving through, McDonald's or wherever had a drive-through, because she wasn't allowed in restaurants. So there was all these accommodations. And I remember when I was around Naples, there's a wonderful doggy park there. So I made it a point of taking my time, doing it the slow way, getting, through the Everglades, which I didn't want to stop at the alley run, they call it, the Gator Alley. And but we got there. I remember stopping in a couple places that were familiar to me that I had gone with my family. Isla Morada was one of them. So we took our time, and there's also Janet was kind enough, after my daughter Maura passed, to do a little ritual at a park that Maura and I went to during her last road trip. Maura and I were big on road trips, and this was the last one that she was well enough to take. So we went down to the Keys, and Maura actually caught a wonderful sailfish. So that's another story. I actually wrote that story. It was called The Last Road Trip. So here we are. I'm having my nostalgic moments, taking my time, going to these wonderful places. I think it was called Carroll Park, Carol. It was halfway between Isla Morada and the Keys. And then, I finally got down to the Keys and just had a wonderful, wonderful visit. So, but like the point I'm making here in this story is, you've got to accommodate the animal that you're traveling with. You can't, you can't jump in the car and go pedal to the metal. So it was a wonderful trip, and I have very fond memories of that. The other thing I have some fond memories of is a puppy brunch, and I want to talk about this puppy brunch because there's a very lot of emotions around the people that were at the puppy brunch, because not only did Miss Nena pass, but the wonderful Lexi recently passed away, as did Roxy, Susan Robertson's animal, and Gabrielle Ramander's animals, and Miss Nena. We were all at this puppy brunch. And it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. There were others there. I think Ray was there. I can't honestly remember all of them. There was about 7 or 8 of us. But I do remember, I've got a wonderful photo, which I'll post on my wall as I talk about, this show. And, just recently, Nena passed in January. The beautiful Roxy, I think a couple months ago. And just a couple weeks ago, Lexi passed, Gabriella's lovely little doggie. So that photo, is full of feelings about, your animal, just love them and take care of them, because you know what? They're gone, and they're gone. And missing them is unbearable in the beginning. It just is. It's especially if they're a companion, like these 3 doggies were. So if you have a companion pet, know that you're in for a lot of grieving when they go. And I want to talk a little bit about how Nena went, because some of it's a cautionary tale. I had a cold, not a bad cold, but a cold. And I noticed Nena having some trouble breathing, and I thought, oh, she's got my cold. But life went on. We walked, she ate. There weren't overt signs of anything else. So, except one night. And one night, I woke up, and I always slept, by the way, with my window near my bed open. And I hear this sound, and I don't recognize it. And I'm half asleep, and I'm, finally wake up, and it's Miss Nena, and she's making this horrible sound. And not only that, she's as close to the window as she can get without falling off the bed. So I thought, oh my God, she's got pneumonia. And I jump out of bed. I call the vet, the emergency vet, the one on 22nd. And we're having a long talk. This is about 5 a.m. He says, he asked me a bunch of questions. He says, well, bring her in, but I would suggest if you can wait 2 hours, bring her to your vet, be there when they open the doors, because by the time I do the history and everything, I think it's more efficient for you to bring her to your vet. So I thanked him. I sat up with her. She didn't necessarily want me to hold her. She was very restless. She was clearly trying to catch her breath. I remember opening the windows and opening the doors to the patio and trying to get as much air in the place as possible. When she did let me hold her, I held her up high and straight and talked to her and said warm, fuzzy things. And finally, it was 6:30, and jump in the car and get to the vet. This was SPCA vet. I think it's 9th Street. Anyway, they opened the doors, and there I am. And, I said, my dog's in real trouble. And they were very gracious, but they opened the doors, but that doesn't mean the vets are there. So the vets don't show up until later. I don't know why, but that's how it runs there. So there were some good vet techs, and they did some preliminary stuff, but I remember holding her, and her breathing moved from abdominal breathing up to upper chest breathing. And I thought, oh my God, she's breathing very shallow. And the vet had just gotten there. And I literally ran into the back. And I said, my doggie is dying. I think my doggie's dying. And they took Nena. And then the vet came out about, I don't know, later, 10, 15 minutes or something, and said, we've got Nena in an oxygen tent. I said, an oxygen tent? She said, yes, she's in trouble. I said, what kind of trouble? And she said, well, she has congestive heart failure. So I said, well, what does that mean? She says, well, it means that, she's in trouble. She's may not make it. And I said, well, what's the treatment? What do we do? He says, well, at this point, she would probably have to live in an oxygen tent. And I said, live in an oxygen tent? And she looked at me, and she just looked at me, and I knew what she was thinking. I just said, I guess it's her time. And she nodded. So, she put Nena in my arms. I talked to her. This is hard. Anyway, Nena passed quietly. She was given the IV. It was all set up before she was in my arms, so the vet could just do the injection, and I just watched Nena go. And I realized, she hadn't suffered long. She had a good life. You say all these things, to not feel so bad, but it was devastating. And like Forrest Gump, I'm not going to talk about this anymore. So I just wanted to share some of the warning signs for other listeners that don't assume anything when a dog looks like they're having trouble breathing. And even if you've had a cold and you think it's a cold, don't make assumptions. And, she was an older dog. She was about 12, 13 when she passed. But she had years ahead of her. But none of us know. Like one of the earlier vets said, you don't know what she went through. We know she was on the street, but you don't know what happened before that. You don't know. I said, well, I can surmise, that's one of the things I do professionally. I said, well, first of all, I told the vet, I said, she has impeccable manners in the house. He said, well, I said, she won't come in the kitchen. She won't. As long as I own Miss Nena, she did not come in the kitchen. And clearly somebody trained her not to come in the kitchen. And clearly it's because she was so tiny, there could be accidents. People could get hurt. She could get hurt. It wasn't safe for her to be in the kitchen. And I tried to think often, because she was a little night owl too, I tried to think, gee, what could her earlier life been like? I thought, well, maybe she was owned by a chef or something, or somebody that had worked nights, because she came to alive at night, clearly. And it was hard to sometimes keep our hours congruent, because suddenly I'd be up till midnight or 1, So anyway, I tried to surmise this, and I realized that, I can't take anything for granted, and she was a little night owl, and she did have these qualities, and I was grateful that she didn't want to come in the kitchen because I didn't want to trip on her, and but she would sit in the doorway and she would watch me while I prepared a meal. So that was kind of interesting. It was a tell, somebody taught her not to go in a kitchen. It's that simple, and there were other qualities that were very charming. So that's what some of the things I surmised. She also overreacted when a baby cried. I mean, she rarely paid attention to anything that wasn't that wasn't a male dog. That's her focus was on male dogs. and except when a baby cried. If a baby cried on television or if she heard a baby cry, she would immediately get a little agitated. So I started thinking about, where did that come from? The other thing she did, we went to Saturday morning market. You know how many dogs are there. It's crazy. But there was this guy walking along, had a beautiful white dog. And out of a clear blue sky, Miss Nena attacks the dog. She leaps up and attacks the dog. And the guy starts laughing because it's so ludicrous. And I'm shocked. And I'm worried that the dog is going to attack back, which it didn't. She had a negative reaction to white dogs, big white dogs. She did all her life. She had nightmares. She wouldn't go in the kitchen. She loved, when my son came over to visit, I might as well have dropped off the face of the earth. She would follow him around. When he went to bed, she would jump in his bed in the guest room. And I think often, you little traitor, there was one story that we all laughed. I was out in the courtyard with 3 friends. Nena was with me. And we're kind of by the swimming pool. And we're just talking and visiting and everything. And this guy comes out of the pool. And we all noticed him because he was quite a good-looking man. He was, I don't know, about 50 or something. But he was clearly worked out and, was attractive. And he goes and lays down on the bench, the lounge chair, about 10 feet from us. And he positions himself and he gets comfortable, and now he's going to lay in the sun, right? Who goes over there? Miss Nena. What does she do? She goes under the lounge chair. She sniffs around. She sits down and sits under. Here's this total stranger. Now, we all laughed. I said, you little traitor, But she loved men. She also, the only other dogs she really paid attention to were male dogs. And she was crazy about Joe's dog over at UPS. That was kind of her first crush. And I'm trying to think of all the dogs in her life. She had like a series of boyfriends. She had Major, the little Pomeranian. She had, she just had male doggy friends when she was, I had her in little doggy daycare for a while. That did not work. She got kennel cough there, but while she was there, she had a little male companion. And, she just was a doggy guy kind of girl. And I'm assuming her owner, her original owner, one that raised her, was a man, because that would explain that kind of an attraction for her. So she had all these qualities and traits and personalities, and she was, she put up with me, that's for sure. And I had my own, I remember I had a very bad cold. I was coughing. I must have coughed for 2 weeks. You know what? She never left my side. My coughing didn't chase her away. She was just, that was her role. Her role was my companion. When she passed, I had to decide what to do. I knew that I wanted her cremated, but I hadn't bought her a spirit pot yet because I wasn't expecting her to pass. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about spirit pots. This is something I've done with all my pets. As an adult, Sparky I was too young to do this for him, or I would have. But the first spirit pot I bought, and I bought it. Oh, let me get this sequence straight. Well, the first pet I loved dearly as an adult was Sam. And Sam, he was called Sam the Therapeutic Cat. And he was called that because I had my private practice started in my home. And I had the den, secured for private practice, and that became my home office. And it worked beautifully. It was away from, the activity of the family. And one day a client came in, very distraught. She sat down and she burst into tears. And who comes out from under the couch but Sam? I didn't even know he was in the room. And he immediately leaps on her lap. And I'm like, we're both caught by surprise. But I start to apologize and go and take Sam. She says, no, no, no. And she holds him and she sobs holding Sam. And he's purring. He's perfectly happy to be in a stranger's arms who's crying. I thought, wow, this was something I had never seen him do. But then again, I had never had a practice at home. So the next time she comes, the first thing she says is, Sam here. And I said, I don't know. She said, oh, I'd love to have him here. So I went and found Sam and brought him in the office. And he became, over time, he reacted to clients who were in pain. And he would comfort them. And he became literally Sam the therapeutic cat. And he was a beautiful silver tabby, long-haired silver tabby. He was part of a litter mate that we had Angel, that was his litter mate, and then we had Sam, named after that detective, that famous detective, Dashiell Hammett. So his secretary was named Angel. So anyway, that became Sam the therapeutic cat. So when Sam passed, I kept his ashes, but I just kept them. And one day I went to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and it was a wonderful trip. And I did a lot of looking at art there, and I bought a beautiful piece. But there was this shop, and there were these different vessels. And the man came over, and he says, well, these are spirit pots. And he tells me the story of spirit pots. And spirit pots are where you put the animal or the ashes. It can be a human. It's a tradition that's also recognized in South America. Well, you get a container, you put the ashes in there, and then you put things that symbolized the spirit in the spirit pot. And I just got totally enchanted, and I saw this wonderful pot, and it was the right size, and I bought it. And I brought it home. I was very excited to put Sam in his own little spirit pot. But I started to think, well, what else can I put in there? And so I remember I kept his tags. So his tags went in there. I remember he used to like hunting birdies, and I would have to rescue birdies from him. So I put a little tiny artificial bird in there, and I think I put a little bit of his favorite food and some of the pictures of him and the pictures of my children. So he had them with him. You know, it became symbolic. And a lot of the things I do are symbolic in nature. So I was very comfortable doing all that. But building the spirit pot, and I think I put his certificate in there, just a whole bunch of things related to his life. And so I decided to do that for Nena. I have not found a pot yet. Part of the trick of having a spirit pot is finding the right pot. So I am on that quest, but I'm not going out every day looking for a spirit pot because that isn't how I operate. What I do is pay attention to everything. And when I see a spirit pot for Nena, I will know it. I'm very intuitive that way. I'm very comfortable making those decisions on my intuition and my gut. And I will find a spirit pot for her. And I already have a little box with all her stuff I'm going to put in the spirit pot. And that's going to be her little home. And she'll be sitting next to Sam. I also have a tiny little spirit pot. Don't laugh. I have a tiny little spirit pot for Ruby Roo, the bird with an attitude, a little love bird that I rescued. That was just the most aggressive bird pet I've ever owned. And she's got a little tiny spirit pot, as does Jack. Jack, who's Jack? Jack was a little goldfish. And they're sitting there, and they all have their little stories, and it's just the way I am. It's symbolic. I like the idea of, honoring the people and the things and the pets and the fish and the birds and everything that you've loved. And this is a way of honoring them. So that's my Miss Nena story. I'm very grateful for the sponsorship of Joe and UPS and Second and Second, Joe and Don. I'm grateful that you've listened to this. I hope it's been interesting and entertaining for you. I probably could talk another hour, but my voice is going. So thank you for being part of my listening audience. I hope that I'd love feedback if you have it. That would be great. But now it's really time to say goodbye. My next show is going to be an interesting show. I have a person that I'm not going to tell you about the next show because I'm torn between two different shows. But all the shows are going to be about animals. If you want to tell me your story or share your story, Let's Talk Life has a Facebook page. I'm going to put a list on the Facebook page of the kinds of stories I'm looking for. Right now, I'm looking for dads and dogs. I want dads to tell me about their favorite dog. Dogs that, maybe they didn't even care about when they were brought into the family as puppies, but became a bond. We all know that animals select one person in a household, and that becomes their guy or their woman or their child. So think about dogs and dads, everybody. And once again, thank you, Joe, Second and Second, UPS. All your UPS service needs are there. I want to mention the new Barker. Thank you, Anna Cook, for helping me, formulate and think about this show. She helped me brainstorm. And she's the editor and chief honcho at the new Barker magazine. So I want to thank you, Anna. Thank you so much. And it's time to go. Bye-bye.
Let's talk about life. Let's have a little conversation. Let's talk about life. Let's learn a little information. Let's talk about life. Let's talk about love.